Before the waiter finished pouring the wine, before the jazz quartet shifted into their second set, before anyone at the corner table noticed the tremor in her hand, a 20-year-old woman at Baranova's steakhouse folded her fingers in a way that would change 2 lives forever. Her thumb pressed into her palm. Her 4 fingers closed over it. A fist that wasn't a fist. She held it against the white tablecloth for exactly 3 seconds. And 20 feet away, a man who had seen more violence than most soldiers lifted his glass of scotch to his lips and stopped. Because men like Stellan Kor didn't miss details. Details were the difference between breathing and bleeding. And what he had just seen was a detail that most people in this room would never recognize. But Stellan recognized it. The international signal for, "I need help. I am not safe." Baranova's was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise. No sign on the street. No listing in any guide. Just a matte black door on the 7th floor of the Alcero building in downtown Belmont, accessible only by a private elevator that required a code most people would never receive. The tables were spaced far apart, each one an island of mahogany and candlelight. The walls were paneled in dark walnut. The servers wore black and moved like shadows. It was a place where conversations happened that never officially occurred, where deals were made in lowered voices, where men with reputations sat in corners and watched the room with eyes that had forgotten how to look away. Stellan Kor had been coming here for 11 years. He had a booth in the back. The same booth. No one else sat there. No one asked why. Tonight he was alone, which was unusual. He typically brought Mikhail or Dov, sometimes both. But tonight he had wanted silence. A glass of something old, a few hours away from the noise of the empire he had built, and the bodies it was built on. And then he had seen her. She was sitting at a table near the center of the room, positioned like an ornament beside a man Stellan didn't recognize. Mid-40s, expensive suit, loud laugh. The kind of man who wanted people to notice him, who gestured too wide and spoke too loud and touched the woman beside him like she was a thing he owned. But Stellan wasn't watching him. He was watching her. She was young. Too young for this room. 20, maybe 21. Dark auburn hair pulled back in a way that looked elegant but felt controlled. A black dress that fit perfectly and revealed nothing. Minimal jewelry, pale skin, eyes that looked straight ahead at nothing. She had the posture of someone who had been told exactly how to sit, how to hold her wine glass, how to smile without meaning it. She hadn't eaten a single bite of the meal in front of her. She hadn't spoken except when spoken to. And when the man beside her leaned in to whisper something in her ear, she didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't move at all. That was the first thing Stellan noticed. The absence of natural response. The hollow stillness of a woman who had learned that survival meant becoming invisible inside her own body. The second thing he noticed was the signal. She made it once, quickly, while reaching for her napkin. Thumb pressed into palm. 4 fingers closed over it. 3 seconds against the tablecloth. Then her hand relaxed and returned to her lap. Her face didn't change. Her eyes didn't search the room. She didn't look for help because she had probably stopped believing help existed. But she had made the signal anyway. A message in a bottle thrown into a room full of sharks. Stellan set his glass down. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the man beside her. He looked at the 2 men sitting at a table near the door who hadn't ordered food, whose eyes kept returning to the girl, whose jackets were cut wide enough to conceal what was underneath. And something behind his ribs shifted. Not his heart. Stellan wasn't sure he still had one of those. Something older. Something he had buried a long time ago beside a grave in Corvina. "I see you." He didn't say it out loud. But in that moment, without saying a word, she had told him everything. And without knowing it, she had just asked the most dangerous man in Belmont for help. Her name was Marin Valeska. She was 20 years and 3 months old, and for the last 162 days, she had not existed. Not legally, not publicly, not in any way that mattered to the systems that were supposed to protect people like her. Her driver's license was locked in a safe she would never open. Her passport had been taken the second night. Her phone had been replaced with one that only received calls, never made them. The contacts had been deleted. The apps had been removed. Even the camera had been disabled. She had become a ghost who still had a pulse. A woman with a name no one was allowed to use. To the man beside her, to the others who controlled her days and nights, she was simply the new one, or the redhead, or, when they were feeling generous, sweetheart. She had stopped correcting them 4 months ago. Marin sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the candle in the center of the table. The flame flickered. The wax pooled. She watched it the way she watched most things now, without expectation, without hope, without the belief that anything she saw would ever change. The man beside her was named Radko. She didn't know his last name. She wasn't supposed to ask. He was one of several men who rotated through her life like guards at a checkpoint. Some were rougher than others. Some talked too much. Some didn't talk at all. Radko fell somewhere in the middle. He liked to show her off. He liked expensive restaurants and expensive wine, and the way people looked at him when he walked in with a beautiful young woman on his arm. He didn't know her birthday. He didn't know she had once studied architecture. He didn't know she had a younger brother named Pasha who probably thought she was dead. He knew how she looked in a black dress. That was enough for him. "Smile more," he said, leaning close. His breath smelled like red wine and steak. "You look like you're at a funeral." Marin smiled. It was the smile she had practiced in bathroom mirrors at 3 a.m. The one that showed teeth, but not feeling. The one that made her face ache after an hour. "Better," Radko said. He patted her thigh under the table. "You're learning." She was learning. That was the worst part. She was learning how to be what they wanted, how to move through rooms without drawing attention, how to eat slowly or not at all, how to laugh at jokes that made her stomach turn, how to let hands touch her without her soul being present in her body. She was learning how to survive. But survival was not the same as living, and Marin Valeska had not felt alive in over 5 months. The restaurant was beautiful. She could acknowledge that even now, even from inside the glass case she had built around herself, the candles, the music, the soft clink of silverware against porcelain. It was the kind of place she might have dreamed about visiting once, back when she was a girl in Corvina, sketching buildings in her notebook and imagining the cities she would see someday. She had seen cities now, more than she could count. She had seen them through tinted windows, through hotel room curtains, through the gaps between bodies in crowded rooms. She had seen them the way prisoners see the world, in fragments, through barriers, always from the wrong side of the glass. Corvina was 2,000 miles away. Her brother was 2,000 miles away. The life she had been stolen from was 2,000 miles away, and no one was looking for her anymore. The police report had been filed. She knew that much. Her brother had contacted the embassy. He had made phone calls. He had done everything a 23-year-old with no money and no connections could do. But the men who had taken her had connections. They had money. They had systems. They had done this before, many times. And they had learned how to make women disappear in ways that left no trail. Marin was not their first. She would not be their last. She understood this now the way she understood gravity. It was simply a fact of the world she inhabited. But there was still a but. Somewhere underneath the stillness, underneath the practiced smile and the hollow eyes and the mechanical obedience, there was a splinter. A fragment of the girl who had once stayed up until midnight drawing buildings. A shard of the woman who had screamed the first night, who had fought until they taught her not to, who had refused to eat for 3 days until hunger broke her will. That fragment had made the signal tonight, not because she believed anyone would see it, not because she had any reason to hope, but because after all those months of silence, she needed to know that some part of her still remembered how to ask for help. Even if no one answered, she didn't know that someone had. She didn't know that 20 feet behind her, a man with eyes the color of winter iron had just made a decision that would unravel everything. All she knew was that in less than 2 hours, Radko would finish his meal, pay the bill with cash he hadn't earned, and take her back to the place she wasn't allowed to call a prison. And tomorrow would be the same as today. And the day after that. And the day after that. Unless something changed. Unless someone saw. Over 5 months ago, Marin Valeska had been a different person. She had been a second-year architecture student at the University of Corvina. She had shared a small apartment with 2 roommates who left dishes in the sink and played music too loud on weekends. She had a part-time job at a cafe near the river where tourists came for the view and locals came for the coffee. She had a sketchbook filled with buildings that didn't exist yet, structures she had invented in her mind and brought to life in pencil and ink. She had a brother named Pasha who called her every Sunday. She had a mother who had died when she was 16. She had a father she had never met. She had a life. Small, imperfect, ordinary, but hers. The night it ended was a Thursday in September. She had taken a double shift at the cafe because one of the other girls was sick and because she needed the money for textbooks. By the time she locked up, it was nearly midnight. The streets were quiet. The tram had stopped running an hour ago. She decided to walk. It was only 20 minutes. She had done it before. The van came from behind. She didn't hear it until the doors were already opening. Didn't see the men until they were already around her. Didn't scream until a hand was already over her mouth. It happened in less than 10 seconds. One moment she was walking beneath streetlights thinking about the project due on Monday. The next moment she was in the dark, on a metal floor, with zip ties around her wrists and a hood over her head. She screamed anyway. She screamed until her throat tore. She kicked until her legs were pinned. She thrashed until someone hit her hard enough that the world went white and then black, and then silent. When she woke up, she was in a room she didn't recognize. Concrete walls, a single window painted over with white, a mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner. She would stay in that room for 11 days. The men who came and went didn't explain anything at first. They brought water, sometimes food. They looked at her the way buyers look at merchandise, assessing, calculating, deciding. On the 3rd day, a woman came. Older, blonde hair, cold eyes. She told Marin things in a voice that was calm and patient and utterly without mercy. She explained what Marin was now, what she would do, what would happen if she refused, what would happen to her brother in Corvina if she tried to run. They knew where Pasha lived. They knew where he worked. They knew the route he walked every morning to the metro station. The woman said all of this while filing her nails. "You are not the first girl to sit in this room," she said. "You will not be the last. The ones who cooperate have easier lives. The ones who don't." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Marin stopped eating that night. She stopped speaking. She lay on the mattress and stared at the painted window and waited for something, anything, death or rescue or a crack in the walls that might let her slip through. None of those things came. On the 7th day, hunger broke her. She ate the bread they brought. She drank the water. She let her body make the decision her mind refused to accept. On the 11th day, they moved her. New city, new room. Better conditions, but more rules. A bed instead of a mattress. A bathroom she was allowed to use alone. Clothes that were chosen for her. Makeup that was applied by someone else's hands. She was being prepared. The first time a man paid for her company, she went somewhere else in her head. She found a room behind her eyes where the architecture drawings still existed, where the cafe by the river still served coffee, where Pasha still called on Sundays and asked about her classes. She stayed in that room while her body did what it was told. Afterward, she sat in a bathtub for 2 hours and didn't cry because crying required something she no longer had access to. That was the night Maren Valeska learned the difference between dying and disappearing. Dying was final. Disappearing was a process. It happened slowly, in increments, in small surrenders that didn't feel like choices because the alternative was worse. She disappeared a little more each day. Each time she smiled without meaning it. Each time she answered to a name that wasn't hers. Each time she swallowed the words she wanted to scream and replaced them with the silence they required. By the time she arrived at Baranova's steakhouse 162 days later, there was very little left of the girl who had once sketched buildings by the river in Corvina. But there was still a splinter, a fragment that remembered. And tonight, that fragment had done something reckless. It had made a signal no one was supposed to see. It had asked for help from a room full of strangers. It had, for 3 seconds, refused to be invisible. Maren didn't know if anyone had noticed. She didn't know that the man in the back booth had spent the last 15 minutes watching her. She didn't know that his hand had tightened around his glass when she made the signal. She didn't know that somewhere in his memory, another woman had once reached out her hand in a room where no one was watching, and that he had been too late. That was 25 years ago. That was the night his sister Ilyana died in a warehouse outside Meridova, waiting for a rescue that came 12 hours too late. Stellencore had never forgiven himself for those 12 hours, and he had spent 25 years making sure he would never be late again. Not tonight. Not this time. Not her. The thing about cages is that the best ones don't look like cages at all. They look like restaurants with candlelight. They look like hotel suites with Egyptian cotton sheets. They look like designer dresses and champagne flutes, and men who open doors for you with a smile. Maren had learned this in increments. The first cage had been obvious. Concrete, painted windows, a bucket in the corner. That one looked like what it was, and in some ways, that made it easier to understand. You knew you were trapped. You knew the walls were walls. There was a brutal clarity to it. But the cages that came after were different. They were gilded, perfumed, lined with silk and lies. The men who controlled her didn't use chains. They didn't need to. They had something more effective. Her brother's address. Her brother's photograph. Her brother's daily schedule written in a notebook she had seen once and would never forget. If you run, the blonde woman had told her on that 11th day, we won't come for you. We'll go to Corvina instead. We'll find Pasha, and we'll make sure you know exactly what happens to him before we send you his photograph. She had said it the way someone might discuss the weather. That was the chain. Invisible, unbreakable, wrapped around Maren's throat every second of every day. She had tested it once. In the 3rd month, she had slipped away from a handler in a hotel lobby in Voss. She had made it 4 blocks before they found her. They didn't hurt her. They didn't need to. Instead, they showed her a video on a phone. Pasha walking to work. Pasha buying coffee at the stand near his office. Pasha unlocking the door to his apartment at 7:14 p.m. Next time, the man holding the phone had said, the video will be different. She hadn't run again. Now she sat in Baranova's steakhouse with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the candle and her mind cycling through the same calculation it always did. If I stay, I disappear slowly. If I run, Pasha dies. There was no third option. The men at the door were watching her. She could feel their eyes even when she wasn't looking. They rotated shifts every 6 hours. They knew where she slept. They knew when she woke. They knew the rhythm of her breathing because they had made it their business to know. Radko's hand was on her knee again. Squeezing. Possessive. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I'm tired." "You're always tired." He leaned closer. "Maybe I should find ways to keep you awake." She didn't respond. Response invited escalation. She had learned to become a mirror that reflected nothing, a surface that offered no friction, no resistance, no foothold for cruelty to grip. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Tonight, Radko seemed satisfied with her silence. He returned to his steak. He laughed at something the waiter said. He checked his phone twice and typed a message she wasn't allowed to read. Maren sat still. But inside, the splinter was awake. The signal she had made 10 minutes ago was still echoing in her blood. It had been stupid, reckless, pointless. No one in this room would know what it meant. No one in this room would care. These were not the kind of people who saved women like her. These were the kind of people who bought them. And yet, something had shifted in the air after she made it. Something she couldn't name. A texture. A vibration. The feeling of being watched by someone who wasn't watching the way the others watched. She was probably imagining it. Hope was a hallucination for women in her position, a trick the mind played to keep the body functional. She had learned not to trust it. But the splinter didn't listen to logic. The splinter remembered what her hands had done. The splinter whispered, "Someone saw." In 90 minutes, Radko would pay the check. The two men at the door would stand. The car would be waiting outside. She would be taken back to the apartment on the 14th floor, where the windows didn't open and the door had 3 locks, all on the outside. And tomorrow would be the same. And the day after. And the day after. Unless the signal had landed. Unless someone in this room had seen a fist that wasn't a fist. Unless, for once, the universe remembered that Maren Valeska was still alive. She didn't look around the room. She didn't search for a rescuer. She had stopped believing in rescuers 4 months ago. But the splinter believed. Stupid, reckless, irrational. The splinter believed anyway. And 20 feet behind her, a man with watchful gray eyes was already making a phone call. Stellan Kor had not always been a man people feared. Once he had been a boy in Corvina, back when Corvina was still part of the old country, before the borders shifted and the names changed, and the maps were redrawn by men who had never walked those streets. He had grown up in a building with no elevator, 4th floor, 2 rooms, a mother who worked nights at the textile mill, a father who had died before Stellan learned to walk, and a sister, 3 years younger, with dark hair and a laugh that could fill a room. Ilyana. He hadn't said her name out loud in years, but he thought it every day. He thought it when he woke. He thought it when he signed papers that moved money across borders. He thought it when he sat in the back of restaurants like this one and watched the room with eyes that never stopped scanning. She had been 17 when they took her. Stellan had been 24. He had already started building the organization that would become his empire. But he was still small then, still regional, still learning the architecture of power in a world that rewarded the ruthless and buried the kind. Ilyana had been walking home from her job at the pharmacy. Evening shift. She always took the same route down Vaska Street, past the old church, through the alley that saved 10 minutes. She never made it home. Stellan spent 6 days looking for her. He called in every favor. He threatened men who had never been threatened. He tore through the underworld of Corvina like a fire looking for oxygen. He found her on the 7th day, a warehouse outside Meridova. 12 hours too late. She was still alive when he broke down the door. Barely. Her body had been used in ways he would never describe to anyone, would never allow himself to fully remember. She looked at him with eyes that were already leaving. "Stell," she whispered. "You came." "I came," he said. "I'm here. I'm taking you home." She died in his arms before the ambulance arrived. He had been 12 hours too late. That was the night Stellan Kor stopped being a man who built things and became a man who destroyed them. He found the people responsible. It took him 2 years. Some of them he killed himself. Others he delegated to men who specialized in making endings last. When it was over, the network that had taken Ilyana no longer existed. But she was still gone. And the 12 hours still burned in his chest like a coal that never cooled. After that, Stellan had changed. He became harder, colder, more deliberate. He expanded his territory not for money, not for power, but for reach. The farther his organization extended, the more he could see. The more he could control, the more he could prevent. He had built something into the foundation of his empire that no one talked about but everyone knew. Women and children were off limits. Not just to his men, but to anyone operating in his territory. The penalty was absolute. No warnings, no negotiations, no second chances. The men who trafficked, the men who sold, the men who bought and used and discarded. They learned to stay out of Velmont. Those who didn't learn became lessons. Stellan had never saved Ilyana. He had been too late. But in the 25 years since, he had saved others. Dozens, maybe hundreds. He didn't keep count. Counting would make it feel transactional. And it wasn't. It was penance. Every woman he pulled out of a trap was an apology to a sister who couldn't hear it. Every network he dismantled was a letter to a ghost. And still, it was never enough. The coal still burned. The 12 hours still echoed. The sound of her voice saying, "You came," still woke him at night. Now, in Baranova's steakhouse, Stellan watched the young woman in the black dress and felt the coal flare hotter than it had in years. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he recognized her. Not her face, but the absence behind her eyes, the hollowness, the mechanical stillness. He had seen that look in the warehouse in Maradova, just before Ilyana closed her eyes for the last time. This woman was still breathing, still sitting upright, still performing the role they had given her, but she was dying in the same slow way, disappearing in the same increments, drowning in a room full of people who didn't see her. Except he saw her. He had seen the signal. And for the first time in years, Stellan Kor felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Urgency. He pulled out his phone. He typed a message to a man named Dov, who had worked with him for 15 years and never once asked an unnecessary question. Baranova's, 4th floor. I need eyes on a vehicle. Black sedan probably waiting outside. 2 men at the door table. The woman in the center of the room. Auburn hair. Black dress. She's not here willingly. The reply came in 8 seconds. Understood. Moving now. Stellan put the phone away. He looked at the woman one more time. She was staring at the candle. Her hands were in her lap. She had no idea that anything had changed. But everything had. Because Stellan Kor had just made a decision. And when he made decisions, the world rearranged itself to accommodate them. It happened between the main course and the dessert. Radko had excused himself to take a phone call. Something about a shipment, a delay, numbers that didn't add up. He stepped away from the table with his phone pressed to his ear, and his voice already rising in the tone he used when subordinates disappointed him. The 2 men at the door stayed seated. They watched Marin. She could feel their eyes like hands on her skin. But they weren't close. And for the first time in hours, no one was touching her. That was when the waiter approached. He was young, mid-20s, neat black vest, a white towel folded over his arm. He moved with the practiced grace of someone who had been trained to be invisible until needed. More water, miss? Marin nodded. She didn't look up. He poured. The water caught the candlelight as it fell into the glass. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary gesture. but she found herself watching it the way a person lost in the desert watches rain. "There's a man in the back booth," the waiter said quietly, not looking at her. "Gray coat. Corner seat. He asked me to give you a message." Marin's blood turned to ice. "He said to tell you, I saw the signal, and I'm not going to look away." The waiter finished pouring. He straightened. He gave a small professional nod and walked away, without waiting for a response. Marin sat perfectly still. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain the men at the door could hear it. Her hands wanted to shake. Her eyes wanted to search the room. Her body wanted to stand and run toward whoever had sent that message. She did none of those things. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes on the candle and her face showing nothing, 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 because that was what 162 days had taught her. But inside, the splinter was screaming. Someone saw. Someone knows. Someone is not looking away. It could be a trap. That was the first thought. Another test. Another way to measure her obedience. They had done things like this before, in the early months. Offered hope, then punished her for reaching toward it. But the signal. The specific signal. No one used those words by accident. No one referenced it unless they knew what it meant. I saw the signal. She had to look. She had to see who had sent the message. But if she turned too quickly, if she reacted too visibly, the men at the door would notice. They would tell Radko. Questions would be asked. And she would learn, again, what happened to women who allowed themselves to hope. She waited. She counted to 60 in her head. Then she reached for her water glass and, in the motion of lifting it to her lips, let her eyes drift to the back corner of the room. He was there. Gray coat. Corner seat. Alone. He was older than she expected. 50, maybe more. Broad shoulders. A face that looked like it had been carved rather than born. Gray eyes that were already looking at her with a stillness that felt like a held breath. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He didn't do anything that might draw attention. But he held her gaze. And in that moment, something passed between them that had no name. It was not trust, because trust was earned and they had never spoken. It was not hope, because hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was something simpler. Recognition. I see you. I know what's happening. You are not invisible. Marin looked away. She set the glass down. Her hand was trembling now, just slightly, a vibration she couldn't control. Radko was still on his phone. His voice was getting louder. The call was going badly. He would be angry when he returned. He would need someone to absorb that anger. She had minutes, maybe less. The waiter was near the back of the room now, clearing a table that didn't need clearing. He was positioning himself close to the man in the gray coat. They exchanged words, brief, invisible to anyone who wasn't watching. And then the man stood. He didn't approach directly. He moved toward the bar first, as if he had simply decided to order another drink. He spoke to the bartender. He gestured casually. He was performing a role, she realized, the role of a man who was doing nothing important. But he was moving closer. Marin's heart was a trapped bird in her chest. Radko was still turned away. The men at the door were watching, but they were watching her, not the room. They didn't notice the man drifting closer. They didn't notice the careful choreography of his approach. He passed her table. For 1 second, he was close enough to touch. And in that second, without breaking stride, without looking at her, he spoke. Restroom hallway, 3 minutes, alone. Then he was gone, moving past her toward the back of the restaurant, disappearing through a door marked with a small brass plaque. Marin didn't move. She sat with her hands folded and her eyes on the candle and her mind racing through every possibility. Trap, rescue, test, salvation. She had no way to know which it was, but she had 3 minutes to decide. 3 minutes to choose between the certain slow death of staying and the uncertain risk of reaching toward a stranger who had seen her signal. Radko was ending his call. She could hear him saying sharp goodbyes, cursing under his breath. He would be back at the table in less than a minute. She had to move now. Or never. The splinter made the choice before her mind could argue. Marin stood. She murmured something about freshening up. She walked toward the back of the restaurant with her head high and her hands steady and her pulse screaming in her ears. The men at the door watched her, but they didn't follow. Not yet. She pushed through the door into the hallway, and he was there, waiting in the shadows, watching her approach with eyes that held no pity, no judgment, no expectation. Just a question. Marin stopped 3 feet away from him. She looked at his face. She looked at his hands, visible at his sides, deliberately unthreatening. She opened her mouth to speak, and the only word that came out was the one she had been holding for 162 days. Please. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit. The sounds of the restaurant faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of ventilation and the distant clatter of the kitchen. Stellan didn't move toward her. He stayed where he was, his back against the wall, his hands visible, and his posture communicating one thing. You have space. You have choice. I am not a threat. Please, she had said. He let the word hang between them. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He understood that this woman had probably spent months being told when to speak, what to say, how to say it. Silence, offered without pressure, was its own kind of gift. Marin stood 3 feet away, trembling. I don't know who you are, she whispered. I don't know why you're doing this. But if this is a test, if they sent you, just tell me now. I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't survive another one. It's not a test. How do I know that? You don't. Stellan's voice was low, steady. You have no reason to trust me. I'm a stranger in a restaurant. You've been taught that hope is a trap. You've been punished for reaching toward it. I know how this works. Her eyes flickered. Surprise. Recognition. You know? I know. He paused. My sister was taken when she was 17. I found her too late. She died in a warehouse outside Meridova while I held her hand and told her I was taking her home. The words landed like stones in still water. Marin stared at him. She searched his face for the lie, the angle, the manipulation. She had become an expert at reading men, at finding the cruelty beneath the kindness, the condition beneath the offer. She didn't find it. She found something else instead. Something she hadn't seen in 162 days. Grief. Real grief. The kind that doesn't perform itself for an audience. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be sorry. Just tell me what you need. The question broke something open. What did she need? No one had asked her that. Not once. Not since the van. Not since the concrete room. Not since the blonde woman with the cold eyes had explained exactly what Marin's life would become. She needed everything. She needed her brother. She needed her apartment with the dishes in the sink. She needed to wake up without fear. She needed to walk down a street without handlers watching. She needed her name back, her body back, her life back. But those were impossible things. So she said the only thing that felt small enough to ask for. I need to get out. Then you'll get out. You don't understand. They have people. They have connections. They know where my brother lives. They showed me videos of him walking to work. If I run, They won't. You can't promise that. I can. Stellan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something beneath it. A bedrock of certainty that came from a place beyond argument. The men who took you operate in the margins. They survive by staying invisible. They are very good at controlling women who are alone. He paused. You are not alone anymore. Marin's breath caught. Those words. You are not alone anymore. She had imagined someone saying them. In the early weeks, when she still had the energy to imagine, she had pictured rescue the way children picture fairy tales, with heroes who appeared at the right moment and doors that opened when you needed them to. Then she had stopped imagining, because imagination was torture when reality offered no exit. But now a stranger was standing in a hallway saying the words she had given up believing. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Stellan Kaur." She didn't recognize the name, but she recognized the way the syllables fit together, the weight of them, the way a name becomes a reputation before it becomes a person. You're not normal. No. What are you? Someone who doesn't look away. Footsteps echoed from the other end of the hallway. Marin flinched. Her body went rigid, her eyes darting toward the sound. Stellan didn't move. "That's my man," he said quietly. "His name is Dov. He's been watching the front of the building. The car they brought you in is still outside. The two men at the door are still seated. Radko is still at the table, checking his phone, waiting for you to come back." "How do you—" "Because I don't leave things to chance." He took a single step toward her. Not close enough to threaten. Close enough to be heard. "Listen to me carefully. In approximately 4 minutes, Radko is going to come looking for you. When he does, you have two choices. You can go back to that table, finish the evening, return to whatever place they're keeping you, and tomorrow will be exactly like today." He paused. "Or you can walk out the service entrance at the end of this hallway. There's a car waiting. It will take you somewhere safe. A place they don't know. A place they can't reach. And by morning, the men who control you will learn that certain boundaries have been crossed. Boundaries that cannot be uncrossed." Marin's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. "My brother," she said. "Pasha. They'll go after him. I have people in Corvina. They've been mobilized since I sent the first message. Your brother will be under protection within the hour. His address has already been flagged. Anyone who approaches him will be intercepted before they get within 100 meters." She stared at him. "You did all that? In the time since I made the signal?" "I did all that in the time it took Radko to finish his steak." Something between a laugh and a sob escaped her throat. It was an ugly sound, desperate, relieved, terrified, all of it at once. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Stellan looked at her for a long moment. His gray eyes held something she couldn't name, something old and unfinished. "Because I watched someone die waiting for help that never came," he said, "and I swore on her grave that I would never be late again." The words settled into the space between them. Marin understood then. This wasn't kindness. It wasn't charity. It wasn't even heroism. It was penance. She recognized it because she understood what it meant to carry a debt you could never repay. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I'll go. I'll walk out the service entrance. I'll get in the car." Stellan nodded. He didn't smile. He didn't offer comfort. He simply turned and gestured toward the end of the hallway, where a man with broad shoulders and watchful eyes was holding open a door marked "Staff Only." "Dov will take you from here. I'll handle what comes next." Marin took a step, then another. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her heart was pounding so hard she could taste it. At the door, she stopped. She turned back. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to—" "Don't thank me yet." Stellan's voice was quiet. "Thank me when you're free." She held his gaze for one more second. Then she walked through the door into the cold night air. And for the first time in 162 days, Maren Valeska took a step that no one had told her to take. Stellan returned to his booth. He sat down. He picked up his glass. He took a sip of scotch that had gone warm in his absence. He did all of this slowly, deliberately, with the patience of a man who understood that the next few minutes would determine several futures. Radko was back at the table now. He was looking around. His face was shifting from annoyance to confusion to the first edges of alarm. The woman was gone. Stellan watched him stand, watched him snap his fingers at the two men by the door, watched the three of them begin moving through the restaurant, checking the restroom, checking the bar, checking the corners. They wouldn't find her. She was already in the car. Already moving through the streets of Velmont toward a safe house in the Cardin district that existed on no map and belonged to no name. Dove would stay with her. Two other men would join them within the hour. By morning, she would have documentation, resources, and options. But that was the easy part. The harder part was about to walk toward his table. Radko spotted him. Or rather, Radko spotted the way Stellan was sitting, the way he was watching, the way he hadn't moved when everyone else in the restaurant had begun to notice the commotion. Radko approached. He was trying to project authority. Stellan could see it in the set of his shoulders, the tilt of his chin. He was a man accustomed to controlling rooms, accustomed to being feared. He had no idea who he was walking toward. "You," Radko said, stopping at the edge of Stellan's booth. The woman who was sitting in the center of the room, auburn hair, black dress. "Did you see where she went?" Stellan looked up at him. He didn't stand. He didn't adjust his posture. He simply held Radko's gaze with the flat, cold stillness of a man who had seen worse than this and would see worse again. "I saw her leave," Stellan said. "Leave where?" "Through the service entrance, about 6 minutes ago." Radko's face darkened. "And you didn't stop her? You didn't say something?" "Why would I stop her?" "Because she belongs to—" Radko caught himself, but too late. The word belongs had already escaped. It hung in the air like smoke. Stellan set his glass down. "She belongs to no one," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Something shifted in Radko's expression. A flicker of recognition. A dawning awareness that this conversation had edges he hadn't anticipated. "Who are you?" "My name is Stellan Kor." The name landed. Stellan watched it register. Watched Radko's face cycle through confusion, then memory, then fear. The fear was satisfying. Not because Stellan enjoyed it, but because it meant he wouldn't have to explain twice. "You," Radko breathed. "Me. This isn't your territory. This isn't your business. She's under my protection now. Effective immediately. Non-negotiable." Radko's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "You can't just—" "I can." Stellan stood. He wasn't taller than Radko, but he didn't need to be. Height was irrelevant. What mattered was the weight of history, the architecture of reputation, the knowledge that certain men made certain promises and kept them absolutely. "The woman is gone. You won't look for her. You won't contact her. You won't speak her name. If you do, I will take it personally. There are people above me, people who won't—" "I know who's above you." Stellan's voice didn't rise. It lowered. It became something that crawled beneath the skin. "Yevgeny Sorath operates out of Meridova, runs the corridor between Corvina and Velmont. We've never met, but he knows my name. Call him. Right now. Tell him what happened tonight. Ask him what he wants to do." Radko stood frozen. "Go ahead," Stellan said. "I'll wait." The silence stretched. The two men from the door had approached, but they stayed back, reading the situation, recognizing that something had shifted in a direction they didn't understand. Finally, Radko pulled out his phone. His hands were unsteady. He dialed. He waited. Stellan heard the voice that answered. Low, accented. The voice of a man who had built an empire on the movement of human cargo. Radko spoke rapidly, explaining, justifying, invoking Stellan's name. There was a long pause. Then the voice on the phone said something short, something final. Radko's face went white. He ended the call. He looked at Stellan with the expression of a man who had just learned the limits of his own power. He said to let it go, Radko whispered. He said not to pursue. Smart man. But she's worth nothing to you anymore. Stellan stepped closer. Close enough that only Radko could hear. But I want to be clear about something. The woman you took is the beginning of a larger conversation. One I intend to have with your employer very soon. The networks you operate, the routes you use, the inventory you move, all of it is going to change. And if it doesn't change voluntarily, I'll change it myself. He stepped back. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Then Stellan Kor walked out of Baranova's steakhouse and into the cold night air, leaving behind a man who had just learned the hardest lesson power had to teach. That there was always someone with more of it. And that some men didn't look away. The safe house was on the third floor of a building that looked abandoned from the outside. The windows were dark. The facade was weathered. The entrance was through a service door in the alley that required 3 separate keys and a code that changed every 12 hours. But inside, it was warm. Maren stood in the center of a small living room and tried to remember how to breathe. There was a couch, a kitchen with a refrigerator that hummed, a bathroom with a door that locked from the inside, a bedroom with a window that looked out onto a courtyard where a single tree grew between the concrete. There was a lock on the front door, a deadbolt, and when Dov had shown her how it worked, he had handed her the key. "This is yours," he had said. "No one enters without your permission, not me, not anyone." She had held the key in her palm and stared at it like it was something precious, something sacred. A key. Such a small thing, such an ordinary thing. She hadn't held one in 162 days. Now she sat on the couch with the key still in her hand and tried to understand what had happened. She was out. She was alive. She was in a room where no one was watching her, timing her, measuring her compliance. The realization didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. In the sound of the refrigerator, in the softness of the cushion beneath her, in the absence of footsteps in the hallway, in the silence that was actually silent, not loaded with threat. She started to shake. It began in her hands, then her arms, then her whole body, trembling with something that wasn't cold, wasn't fear, wasn't anything she could name. Dov had stepped out to make a phone call. She was alone, and for the first time since the van, since the concrete room, since the painted window, Maren Valeska had permission to fall apart. She cried. Not the silent tears she had learned to hide. Not the controlled sobs she had swallowed in bathroom stalls at 3 a.m. Real crying. The kind that came from the bottom of something that had been pressed down for so long it had forgotten it existed. She cried for the girl who had walked home from the cafe. She cried for the months of silence. She cried for her brother, who thought she was dead. She cried for the version of herself she had lost, piece by piece, in rooms where no one cared whether she survived. She cried until her body had nothing left. And then she sat in the silence and listened to the refrigerator hum and held the key against her chest like a talisman. Dov knocked before entering. She heard his voice through the door, asking permission. She said yes. He came in with a phone in his hand. "Your brother," he said. "We've made contact. He's safe. Our people reached him before anyone else did. He's being moved to a secure location in Corvina until this is resolved." Maren stared at him. "You talked to Pasha?" "Not directly, but he knows you're alive. He knows you're safe. And he's been given a secure line. When you're ready, you can call him." She couldn't speak. Pasha knew. Pasha was safe. Pasha hadn't given up. "There's more," Dov continued. "A lawyer will contact you tomorrow morning. Her name is Reva Ostrova. She specializes in cases like yours: documentation, asylum, prosecution of the networks involved. She's very good at what she does." Marin nodded. She couldn't process all of it. The information was too much, too fast. After months of nothing, she was suddenly drowning in possibility. "How long can I stay here?" "As long as you need." "And the people who, they've been warned. The conversation has been had." Dov's face was impassive, but something flickered behind his eyes. "They won't come for you. And if they try, they won't get far." She should have asked what that meant. She should have questioned the implications. But she was too tired, too empty, too hollowed out by everything that had happened in the last few hours. So she simply said, "Thank you." Dov nodded. He placed the phone on the table beside the couch. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow is soon enough for everything else." He left. The door closed. The deadbolt clicked. Marin looked at the phone. She looked at the key in her hand. She looked at the window where the tree stood alone in the courtyard, bare branches reaching toward a sky she couldn't see. She thought about calling Pasha. She thought about hearing his voice for the first time in over 5 months. She thought about trying to explain where she had been, what had happened, how she had survived. But not tonight. Tonight, she would do something she hadn't done in 162 days. She would sleep lying down, in a room with a door that locked from the inside, with a key that belonged to her. Marin Valeska closed her eyes, and for the first time since September, she exhaled. 4 months later, on a January evening so cold the windows of Baranova's steakhouse had frosted at the edges, a woman walked through the front door alone. She was 21 now. Her hair was shorter than it had been, cut to her shoulders, a choice she had made herself in front of a mirror in an apartment she paid for with money she had earned. Her dress was simple, black, like before, but different. Chosen, not assigned. Worn because she liked how it felt against her skin, not because someone had told her to put it on. Her name was Marin Valeska, and she was free. The hostess looked up. "Do you have a reservation?" "No." Marin smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that started at her mouth and traveled to her eyes. "I just wanted to see the place again." She was seated at a table near the center of the room, not far from where she had sat that night, 4 months ago, when her hands had been folded in her lap and her eyes had been empty, and her only hope was a signal no one was supposed to see. The waiter approached, different from the one who had delivered the message that night, but dressed the same. Black vest, white towel, professional invisibility. "Something to drink?" "Water," she said. "And the soup. Whatever's good tonight." "Right away." She looked around the room. The candles still flickered. The jazz quartet still played. The tables were still islands of mahogany and lowered voices. Nothing had changed about this place. Everything had changed about her. The last 4 months had been the hardest of her life. Harder, in some ways, than the months that came before, because survival was one thing, recovery was another. She had met with Reva Ostrova, the lawyer. She had given statements. She had identified photographs. She had provided testimony that would help dismantle a network that had moved dozens of women through 6 countries. She had called Pasha. She had heard him cry. She had cried with him for an hour before either of them could form sentences. She had moved into an apartment in the Selmar district. Small. 1 bedroom. A window that overlooked a street where people walked dogs and children played, and life happened in ordinary, beautiful ways she had forgotten existed. She had started working at an architecture firm. Entry level. Long hours. A drafting table covered with blueprints and sketches and the beginnings of something that felt like a future. She had nightmares. She still flinched at certain sounds. She still checked the locks 3 times before bed. She still woke sometimes at 3 a.m. and sat in the dark and waited for footsteps that never came. But she was healing. Slowly. In increments. The way wounds heal when you finally stop reopening them. The soup arrived. She ate slowly. Not because she was conserving, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to taste it. Because she had time. Because no one was watching her with measuring eyes. When she finished, she asked for the check. And that was when she saw him. He was sitting in the back booth. The same booth. Gray coat, watchful eyes. Alone. As he had been that night. Stellan Core. She hadn't seen him since the hallway. Since the moment he had pointed her toward the door and told her not to thank him until she was free. She was free now. Maren stood. She walked to the back of the restaurant. She stopped at the edge of his booth. He looked up. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Something that might, in a different man, have been called emotion. "You came back," he said. "I wanted to see where it started." "And?" She looked around the room, then back at him. It looked smaller now. Something crossed his face. Not a smile, but the ghost of one. The shadow of something that had once known how to smile and might, someday, remember again. "I heard you've been working with Riva," he said. "She's relentless. That's why she's good." Maren nodded. She stood there for a moment longer, trying to find the words for something she had been carrying for 4 months. "You asked me not to thank you until I was free," she said finally. "I'm free now." Stellan looked at her. He saw the woman she had become, the strength she had rebuilt, the life she was reclaiming, one choice at a time. "Then thank me by living," he said quietly. "That's enough." She held his gaze. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The tears had served their purpose. What she had now was something better. A future. "I will," she said. Then she turned and walked out of Baranova's steakhouse into the cold January night, into a city that no longer felt like a cage. Behind her, Stellan Core watched her go. He saw the way she walked, head high, shoulders back, steps that belonged to her. He thought about Ilyana. He thought about the warehouse in Meridova. He thought about the 12 hours that had haunted him for 25 years. And for the first time since that night, the weight shifted. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Because he hadn't been late this time. He had seen the signal, and he hadn't looked away. Stellan finished his scotch. He set the glass down. He looked at the door through which Maren had disappeared into her new life. Then he stood, put on his coat, and walked into the night. Because there were others out there. Other signals. Other women in other rooms who hadn't been seen yet. And Stellan Core had made a promise. He intended to keep it.